Hello, my name is Dr. Alan Lumsden. I'm the chairman of the Department of Cardiovascular Surgery here at Houston Methodist DeBakey Heart and Vascular Center. I'm joining you today from our studios in the DeBakey CV Live studios, part of our Heart and Vascular Center here in Houston, Texas. There are many challenges in the world today. One of them, of course, that we all share is the exit strategy from COVID. We're glad to tell you that we're now really fully back up to a full operating schedule. And I'd like to think we've got it somewhat under control here in Houston. But this is a unique format, the Icarus format, and we're really excited to participate in it because we're really interested in all forms of cardiovascular virtual education. So I hope you enjoy this new structure.
Hi, I'm Dr. Craig Walker. I'm an interventional cardiologist in Houma, Louisiana. I'm also a professor of medicine and cardiology at Tulane Medical School and Louisiana State University Medical School. I'm also the editor of Vascular Disease Management. I'm an interventional cardiologist, but I have massive interest in the peripheral vascular field. Limb salvage is one of my primary areas of interest. I live in Houma, Louisiana, which is on the very southern part of Louisiana, very close to the Gulf of Mexico. Behind me, here's the Intracoastal Canal, which is a major canal for commerce running between Florida and Texas, and it runs right behind my office where we're filming this today. I moved back to Houma in 1983 to start the Cardiovascular Institute of the South. I moved back to Houma from Harvard because this was my hometown and my family was living here. I look forward to meeting with all of you at the meeting.
This is Jan Skowronski, and welcome to Birmingham, Alabama. A beautiful city of southern charm, green mountains and colorful gardens, but also a city of rather perplexing history. On September 15, 1963, Ku Klux Klan detonated a bomb in a local church, killing 4 small African-American girls. Next to the site of the bombing, the Civil Rights Institute was erected, and that's definitely a place to visit when you come here. Times have changed since. And right now, Birmingham is a powerful scientific and research place and the site of University of Alabama at Birmingham. And since I moved here 2 years ago, I have been a repeated recipient of Southern hospitality. On the medical front, every time I get up and go to work, it feels like this is the world capital of vascular disease. Thank you. We invited our good friends and colleagues to talk about where we are as a society, as a professional group. I think our lives have changed, and I'm privileged to introduce Alan Lumsden, who will chair the session on post with a question mark, reopening, and then the vascular therapies. Alan has many titles. He's a chairman there, he's a director there, he's a president there. We had difficulty putting him in a frame on our webpage because he has too many titles. So, Alan, we are in a difficult spot right now. And how are you? Go ahead.
I'm very good. And thank you very much, both from me and from the International Society of Endovascular Specialists. It's a privilege to participate in this novel, because it really was novel when you first proposed this concept. A lot of people have discovered Zoom, but you discovered it a long time ago, and this idea of putting these virtual meetings together. So let me congratulate you on pulling this off. We often think about the hot topics being re-entry devices and pedal access. Unfortunately, the hot topic that we're all dealing with on a daily basis is COVID, and it's an ever-changing problem that we have. And so some of us are post-COVID. Some parts of the United States are still very much in it. And what we want to do is address some of the issues that we're dealing with as we emerge from this. And so we've kind of got a star-studded cast of characters here, all of whom have already been introduced. But the kind of topics that we're going to try and address, and we'll try not to be redundant. So when we get the discussants coming in, let's not repeat what somebody else has said. Just add in if there's something new that you can add from your particular site. So the huge issues that we're dealing with are fear of patients coming back to the institutions, somehow or other at Methodist, we became the preferred providers for COVID. That's not a great place to be when you're trying to reopen the schedule afterwards. Number two is testing. Number three is how do we get imaging? How do we get follow-up for these patients? And how have we introduced teleproctoring? And Craig, let me put you on the spot right off the bat, because I've visited your place. Was very impressed with your telemedicine technology. Tell us how you deployed it. We already really had a lot of this deployed, but give us some insight into how you've deployed this and to an even further extent during the pandemic.
Sure. So 4 years ago, we decided we wanted to really improve our telemedicine. And we made a major investment as a group, thinking it would improve care, allow us to have outreach, allow patients easier access to us. And this was going along pretty well with roughly 40,000 patient calls every single month into our telemedicine center. Well, Louisiana was, of course, one of the hotbeds of coronavirus. And it really played a major role for us because it allowed us to pre-screen every patient before they came in. It allowed us to know who had symptoms, who may have active coronavirus, and we may want to keep those people isolated. It allowed us to set up our whole strategy for dealing with this. So we've stayed open through the entire crisis. Of 850 employees, which we have at CIS, actually 870, we've had only now 11 documented cases of COVID, and not one of those came from work at our office. All of those contracted it from family members who had gotten it outside. So by appropriate screening and cleaning in between and making sure that if anyone was sick, that we kept them out, it really stopped us from having, at least amongst our physician workers and co-workers in the medical field, a big setback. Now, we were affected by patients not wanting to come certainly into hospitals, but even into clinics at first. And so we saw a downturn in our volume for a while. That's changed. Right now, we're back up to full volume. Our diagnostic testing is done in our office rather than a hospital. And so that's worked pretty well. And of course, we have available to us several outpatient labs. And during this crisis, those cases that we did in office-based labs where there was less risk of contracting illness because our hospitals were repositories of lots of patients who had COVID virus.
Very good. So there are some analogies between what Jan's doing with this idea of teleeducation and what you've been doing. But now the world has suddenly discovered this. People are catching up on this everybody thinks they can put on a Zoom meeting, and there's been an explosion in telemedicine. We went from doing 40 to 50 teleclinic televisits a day to 4,000. Same platform was always there. It was just the doctors did not really want to engage in this. And so there's obviously opportunity to change behavior in this. So maybe I can get Jan to comment. I'm not sure if we can get Greg in Warsaw to comment, but if not, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what's going on in Alabama and Poland.
Sure. So before I talk about Alabama, I wanted to talk about something very specific. I'm not sure if I would call it telemedicine, but you're the president of ISCVS. So let me tell you how ISCVS helped Birmingham, Alabama. And I think it's a good illustration of how things quickly are changing quickly. So you may or may not remember, you organized or co-sponsored a Zoom meeting, a webinar. I would say it was about 6 weeks ago. And there was a guy from Germany called Michael Lichtenberg,
Sure.
who is very renowned critical limb ischemia operator. And he actually showed us a video and told us that that their patients are scared to come to the hospital. So they are running a campaign, don't let the virus amputate your leg. So what I did, I basically wrote an email to Ashley. Ashley contacted me with Dr. Lichtenberg. We got their materials from Germany, and we're actually implementing the same thing in Alabama because, in fact, the patients are scared. So we are taking many steps, but I will give it back to you and I'll come back a little later. That was just an example.
Yeah, no, I remember that vividly, actually, because we didn't get his material, but we certainly are running ads in town here at the moment, not just targeting legs, but also, of course, the STEMI numbers across the United States have gone way down. Not
40%. 40%. Tim Henry published beautiful paper on it.
Yeah, and so it's a huge issue that we've got, and trying to get the word out that the hospitals are safe, the clinics are safe. We actually screened our staff in the hospital. We had about a 4% COVID positive rate. Now, we had 3 ICUs full of COVID patients. Reality is you're probably more at risk in the community. It's probably got a higher rate than we're actually seeing in our staff. So getting that message out that the hospitals are safe is very important. So can you enlighten us? I don't know if Greg can hear us or participate, Jan, but if not, give us some insight into the situation in Poland.
So I wanted to go to Poland to do this meeting, but actually Poland was extremely strict regarding closing the country. So even before first cases started in Poland, they shut down the country. They shut down the borders. They told everyone to wear masks, to self-isolate. Everything stopped. So the mortality rate of Poland comparing to Alabama, it's about 1/10.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's kind of interesting to bring Craig back in, because all the boards at the sign of the expressway here tell us if you're coming from Louisiana into Texas for a while, you had to quarantine to get in here.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I have to jump in. I don't know what Craig is talking about. I saw the numbers of Louisiana being really high, and now he's talking that almost nobody gets sick in his hospital. Here in Alabama, 17%, if I remember correctly, of all COVID cases are healthcare workers.
Yeah.
Sorry, Craig.
So first, you heard me very wrong.
From Poland.
I didn't say anyone didn't get sick in home Louisiana or in Louisiana. We had a true catastrophe here. What I was talking about was our office personnel, and we did not have many people get sick in our office. So that's a very different parameter there. And we had instituted changes early on to make sure we protected our people in the office, and by protecting them, made sure that we were protecting our patients, and made sure that we clean rooms in between patient visits, making sure that those who we thought may have the virus were seen in a whole different setting, to where others were not exposed, to where people could wait outside in their cars until it was time for them to be seen. So no, I'm not suggesting at all that Louisiana didn't have a big problem. We did. Actually, after New York, we were the second biggest problem in the United States. It was huge. But what I was saying was, we were able to maintain a practice very effectively without a lot of fear of patients contracting the problem in our office because of what we did. To have 870 employees and to have, in this whole crisis, in an area where this is a big problem, have only 11 ultimately test positive is a big deal. And we aggressively tested people. It was not as though we weren't testing people. So we think that with appropriate measures, we can still see patients effectively.
So let's pick up on your comment on testing, because that's the hot button issue at the moment. Let me tell you what we do. We're basically fully open again at the moment. We initially opened up all the outpatient labs, and then we opened up the surgery schedule. But we mandated that anybody who was coming in needed to be tested. Okay, well, then sounds simple. Then lies a whole secondary series of problems and enter into. And I'll give you a patient of mine was an example. It was a patient who was coming up for an open endograft, I believe it was, but they were coming from El Paso. So they went and got all the testing done. We give them instructions that they have to test a minimum of 3 days before they come here. Then they need to isolate. And then they can only bring one family member who can only stay in during the day of the procedure up until 8 o'clock at night, and they got to leave. And that was all fine. But then they call up and said, well, I'm flying up to Houston tomorrow. How does that affect self-isolation? So there are a lot of practical issues in trying to pull this off. And of course, sometimes you end up with patients who arrive and they've not been tested. And we have limited capacity to do on-the-spot rapid sequence testing. So, Jan, what are you doing in Birmingham?
Yeah, so exactly. So how do you deal with a patient who travels to see you 200 miles or 150 miles and needs a kind of elective but still fairly serious surgery or procedure? It's difficult to do the testing sometimes locally in the communities. How do you guys deal with it? And by the way, I think we have Greg can join us. So Greg is joining us before we get back to you. Hello, Greg. Welcome back.
Oh, hello.
Shall we take him while we've got him in case we lose him? Greg.
No, but I have a question to Alan, because you told us that you test patients, but what kind of test do you perform? Do you test everyone? Because right now we came back to admissions, but my hospital told, okay, we have to test everyone, but it takes a lot of time and it's a waste of money probably. But anyway, what kind of test do you perform?
So the slow one is the answer to that. So this was not a hospital decree. We have a committee from the surgeons and the proceduralists, and they jointly decided and included anesthesia in this decision making that we would ask all patients to be tested. And so we don't really have limited access to the rapid test. So it's whatever is done in their community, because it's not being tested at Methodist. We actually, around Houston, have testing centers. We ask them to go there. I can't remember which the two companies that we have two approved tests that we will take. But again, a lot of these patients are not in Houston, and so they have to get it done elsewhere. They have to and this is all done through the doctor's office. Remember, this is not something that's being coordinated by the hospital. That load falls in our office on our nursing staff, who've actually done a remarkably good job. We have had a couple of patients. So we have about the capacity to do about 500 on-site tests at Methodist. So we do have a backup. If a patient arrives here and they don't have their test, we try to say through no fault of their own or through no fault of the physician, just ignoring the directives. So we can do some on-site testing, but that still delays the schedule. I mean, they're a first case start, and I'm going to get done as a first case. So that's where we are at the moment. Now, like everything else with COVID, this may be completely different 2 weeks from now, but that's how we got buy-in to open up the schedule. If they're semi-urgent, they go to the operating room, and we still employ an anesthesiologist. They're still basically wearing full pappers, N95s, clear the room for 30 minutes or 20 minutes, actually, after they're intubated, and that's kind of how we handle those patients. So that's our process.
So this is Jan. So we screen all patients coming for elective procedures. That's number one. We really don't screen employees, and many of them got sick. And I think countries who got really smart about it, they test all healthcare workers. We just don't see it here. And I wondered, I think we probably should talk more about the telemedicine and remote proctoring. I think one of the positive developments in general in medicine is that we switched instantly to telemedicine, and we are just getting good at it. I don't believe there is a reason for a patient who travels from El Paso to see Alan in Houston to really be seen every 3 months physically for a 15 minutes visit. I think some of it will stay. What do you think, guys?
So let me kick this off. So I've been very interested in this, and I went to a telemedicine meeting probably 18 months ago, and the keynote speaker was Toby Cosgrove from the Cleveland Clinic, and he said, well, does telemedicine have a problem? And what he said was, well, it has a big problem. And he said, the problem is you. He said, the technology is there. The pushback is from the physicians. And so he decreed that something like 10 to 15% of all new patient visits at the Cleveland Clinic had to be telemedicine, had to be done in 6 months. And he put all the center directors on the hook and said, you make this happen. And then he went on to say, the highest patient satisfaction that we have are the patients who are being seen remotely. And we've actually emulated this experience. So this is not going to change. I mean, we're going to continue this. And I think that the problem, what had to happen was this push was required on the physicians to make them engage in this technology. Craig, you ran a pretty successful experiment. You figured out how to do this before anybody else.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful, and patients really love it. We did it also so that patients had access to healthcare providers 24/7 every day of the year, and patients also like that. I really view where we're going to be in the post-COVID era, though, to this being analogous to the old house call that doctors used to make. They would actually physically go into a patient's house if the patient had trouble coming in. Now we're going into their house via better communication capabilities without actually having to do the travel. It's allowing the patient not to come in, not to travel long distances. There's many, many advantages. The disadvantage, of course, is that we can't get appropriate testing, but we can arrange those tests once we've seen a patient such that they can come in and get those tests done in short order futuristically. I do think that we are forever going to be in an era where we're going to visit many people via remote telemetry. Certainly our practice is a practice that goes really all over the world. We have lots of patients that come to us from really far away, as you do. And being able to communicate with them via computer is a wonderful thing, I think.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, think about it. The technology right now is as bad as it's ever going to be. And it's pretty darn good. It's only going to get better.
I agree.
Okay.
So this is Jan. I just have to share my personal story with you. It has really nothing to do with medicine, but the societies are getting so quickly, so digitized, and some of them are getting better quicker than the others. But I have to tell you, I was so proud of my mom, who is 81, and she downloaded Skype by herself, and now we can Skype every day. And that leads us into in a different direction, I suppose. I would love to talk about remote proctoring. And I know both of you are big into it. I don't probably have the same access to the level of technology. I saw Alan's almost robots in his OR. I don't think many institutions will be able to afford it, but I would love to proctor a case via Zoom in a different country. Maybe, I don't know, in Ukraine, if someone can write us on chat. I mean, all it really takes is to connect the cardiac cath lab, the imaging computer, to Zoom. And then you can share a screen and we can hear each other. And all I need to see is an angiogram. What do you guys think?
Well, let me tee Craig up here, because this is an interesting story that links his center with ours, was that we have been involved in robotics, endovascular robotics, for a while. It's been kind of an expensive journey, to be completely honest with you, because we started off with the Hansen Magellan, and then they got sold overnight. It was nothing, and now we're working with Corindus, who, mercifully, from that point of view, were bought by Siemens. We're the biggest Siemens install in the world, actually. So we're very interested in this. And so Craig and his group came down to see the Corindus robot, and we took this telepresence robot and put her up in the cath lab and linked it into our little viewing area. And I was talking to, I'm sorry, I don't remember his name. Who's your lead administrator, Craig?
David Knor.
David, that's right. And I was talking to him and I said, do you want me to explain to you how we're transmitting this? And he said, oh, no, I know how you're doing it. I said, really? You know about the Visitor One? He said, oh, yeah, we use it all the time. He was the first person I'd ever talked to who knew anything about what I was talking about. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, we have deployed these. And that's what led me to go out and actually see what they were doing. And so that's not the same thing as teleproctoring, but these platforms are what you need to have to even think about teleproctoring. So, Craig.
Sure. So I think first off, Jan, teleproctoring and actually telecases are going to both be appropriate in the future. So teleproctoring, I've done much of already in China, where I will share a screen, people will show me cases when they run into issues, and we can talk about what options they can use, what wires, what other things would be useful to treat the patient. But I see with 5G coming around in the future, I see a whole different world. I think that we will have, via robots like Corindus, the capability of actually steering wires really across continents if we needed to help cross in certain cases. The problem right now is latency. There's a latency of at least 2 seconds. with typical lines that we're using. Once 5G is available, that latency period will be imperceptible to our eye. And when we steer a wire, we will see much the same that we would see in terms of if we were looking at our own video screens. That will actually allow us to leverage expertise, I think, in many, many parts of the world. So unlike the first, which is giving advice, this is actually helping people cross at that point. Should, that comes with the caveat they would have to have that kind of a machine there. Not every place will have it, but some will. And that will allow.
So let me pick up on that then, and how we deployed this during COVID. So, and it's the same kind of story as the office-based telemedicine. We've had this for a while. Trying to get traction and people to be engaged in this was like, it's like pushing a rock up a hill. You make a little progress, you stop pushing, the thing rolls back down and squashes you. And so, go ahead, John, you want to make a comment?
Okay, guys, you're visionaries and you have unlimited resources. I'm just a regular guy, and I think I'm very practical. So this is what I think. My challenge will be that Dr. Stasiuk may call me 2 weeks from now and ask me to help him with the case in Przemyśl, Poland. I mean, from his presentation, he looked like a perfectly competent guy, but we're just not going to steer wires remotely with a small city in Poland. I need to help him competently if he needs me, and I doubt he does, in a case. So what I'm talking about are very practical solutions for kind of not telehealth, but telehealth, that you can share images with your colleagues, you can be live in a cath lab across the globe, and you can actually help other endovascular physicians. Thank you. I think we have Greg back to the studio. Thank you.
Okay. Greg, you want to make a comment?
Yes, I agree with Jan. Because, but also it is the same in the U.S. in small hospitals where the doctors, they need help, and if they will have the remote proctor, they will feel safer and easier, and this medicine will be much cheaper, because if you have to if you need to go somewhere, you lose your day, you lose someone has to pay you. But if you take 1 hour, it's nothing, between the patients, between the operations, between the procedures, you can help many people around the world. So I think that
So what I also think, it will also really involve and affect device industry. As an industry, they cannot afford to send a rep to Frostbite Falls, Minnesota. I think it's going to be a lot of teleproctoring in the future.
So levels. Now you shouldn't be so shy, John, about expressing your opinion. So reps are paid 50% of their time to drive. That's what they do. Most of the time they're in a car driving. And so you nailed it. The money is in the medical device industry. And if we can make it that a rep can cover an extra 2 or 3 cases a week, this will pay for itself. So let me go back, because this topic was around COVID. That's how we started off. So here's what happened during COVID. We've had this stuff. I have been pushing reps to learn, because this is not just you walk in, you turn on Zoom, and you sit and proctor a case. It's a little more sophisticated. That will doom this if it's like that. And so we've been pushing all reps to learn how to use this interface. Some of them did, some of them didn't. Then COVID hits. Now all of a sudden they're all scrambling and they want to learn this, because we kicked them out. And we only used the reps who had been trained in how to do it. And we had 3 different emergencies, all of whom the rep could roll out of bed, pull up the interface, and support our cases from home. And so this is something we've actually just submitted, because SVS opened up for COVID-related presentations. These were fully supported. And we've continued that after the fact. I don't want you in the room. We like it, but I don't want you in the room, because I want to figure out how to do this. Because, again, you can hold up the camera and FaceTime somebody. I don't think any of us agree that's the way it's going to be. So you need to define the audio, you need to define the video, and you need to define the latency that Craig has already talked about. I did a Corindus case up on a simulator up in our hospital. We can do that. If you do this with less than 500 millisecond latency, then you don't even notice. 2 seconds, you're not going to be able to do a procedure. For remote support, it probably is less than that. But a lot of these technologies exist right now, but I do think in order to popularize this, we're going to have to define what the working parameters are that are acceptable to be able to do remote support. Okay, Jan, what do you think?
In principle, I agree with you, but I just don't think it's realistic to expect hospitals to have those big expenditures. I think it has to be something simple and cheap. And this is then how remote proctoring can penetrate basically all over the world.
So I'll give you another example.
Remember, we're in a cath lab environment. Remember that in that market, if you bring additional piece of equipment, it's very difficult to penetrate the market. You can connect something and then people use it. But if you really bring another machine, tower, or anything, that's going to be tough. So I think it needs to be a simple solution, even if it's not optimal technologically. Thank you.
Craig, any comments?
I don't think we're talking about something that's tremendously expensive that you're speaking of, Jan. I mean, certainly not expensive as compared to a cath lab or the things that we presently are already using. In our office-based lab that we're presently building in Homa, we have all of those capabilities built in, and we're not talking, I mean, this is a minuscule portion of the budget, yet there are huge savings associated with that. And I think not having, one of the reasons costs are so high for medical devices is cost of sales. If one salesman could actually cover 4 or 5 accounts instead of one account, in the future, if they could leverage themselves, because instead of being in their car or truck driving, they're on a computer assisting. Not only does that not have extra people in the room that burden you, but it allows them to be more efficient for their companies. So I think we're confusing two things. The Corindus robot does have some expense to it, but it also has some advantages in certain cases. But the point about telemedicine and telecommunication, that is fairly low-hanging fruit, in my opinion. That's not something that requires millions and millions of dollars of infrastructure.
Yeah, so I think Craig is nailing it. When we start talking about telemedicine, it means so many different things to different people. And we don't just say medicine, we talk about surgery and interventions. And we need to think about telemedicine the same way. It's a fundamentally different solution for the office. It's another solution for proctoring. It is a whole different ballgame if you're talking about actually doing procedures. Mm-hmm. But, I think what the COVID crisis has done is focus the medical device industry, and they're terrified this is going to come back, and they're going to they went to zero revenue for a lot of them. And there's nothing focuses people than looking at their balance sheet and seeing that there's no income. And so now's the time to actually promote some of this. Now, one of the applications that's gotten traction for remote intervention is stroke. I mean, there are not enough neurointerventionists. If you live in, Homa, or you live in Birmingham, or you live in Houston, yeah, you got access to the best people on the planet. You don't have to go too far away in order to be deprived of the opportunity to have mechanical thrombectomy. And that's really what has got a lot of the interest in remote intervention using the robot. I don't know that people are going to be doing remote coronaries or remote SFA, but there's a public health need to popularize or make more available mechanical thrombectomy for stroke.
Well, I can give a nice example of a major save from telemedicine. We have iRobots positioned. They're rented by little community-based hospitals that don't have any cardiovascular expertise. And they pay for these, I want to say about $1,000 a month. But when they have a patient with a medical problem and they think they may have to transfer them, they telecommunicate these cases into us. And what happens is most of these people can stay in their hospitals, but many do need transfer. And there was one great save about 2 months ago that really stuck in my mind. A patient came in very dyspneic. They did an echocardiogram. They did a CT, and they said, well, the patient probably just a little volume overloaded because they had done a CT. And they thought the patient perhaps just had was just volume overloaded. As it turns out, when we looked at the CT, the patient had a dissecting aneurysm, which was rupturing into the pericardial space. And we were able to tell them, no, don't diurese the patient, arrange air transfer to where it was there, have them draw blood and match to send with the patient. When the patient arrived, the patient coded right as the time the helicopter arrived. The surgical team was set and prepped, opened them up, repaired the aneurysm, and 3 days later, this patient went home. That is the power of telemedicine in small communities. Yep. That's the power of this. And so the ability to leverage cardiovascular expertise in little bitty towns with small community-based hospitals is a huge deal. We also use this somewhat on offshore oil platforms. If you're on an offshore oil platform and you happen to have chest pain or other problems, if the weather's good, the closest you are to getting medical care at a hospital is 4 or 5 hours. The weather's bad, it could be 4 or 5 days before they can get you in. And so we have to be able to leverage ourselves. And that's what telemedicine does.
So thank Craig. I think we're getting towards the end of this session. I will predict that the greatest legacy of this pandemic will be the fact that we have engaged telemedicine, and it will change the way that we're practicing. And I do believe that simply by changing the office-based practice will make much more acceptable all these other things that we were talking about. Remote proctoring, remote intervention, that's a little bit down the line, but Craig nailed it as usual. We built a studio in a box because we want to control. When we invite Craig to give a talk, we want to control that picture. We built a 5G hotspot into that. And so 5G is coming and it will completely change what we're doing. So once again, I'm a step behind Craig, but obviously I'm moving in the right direction. So thank you, Jan, for the opportunity. Thank you, Greg, for the opportunity to host this today.
Thank you so much. This is Jan. Thank you. Great session. Tough times. Back to Warsaw.